Well, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Sweeter After Difficulty podcast. I am your host, Randy Highsmith, and with me, as always, I have my two regular guests, Jordan Lopez and Chris Anderson. Fellas, how you doing?
Hey, Randy.
Good.
All right, awesome. So we have a great topic today. This is one that actually we've been kind of toying with and kind of teasing the ideas of it behind the scenes. A subject we weren't exactly sure how to. There's really two subjects here, and we found that they were not necessarily at odds per se, but sort of two words that typically get linked together. People tend to maybe use them interchangeably when actually they have very, very different definitions. So today, as always, we're going to start by kicking over to the quote master general himself, Jordan Lopez, to get us started with our episode quote. Jordan?
All right. So I was kind of listening to a few podcasts this week, and I do it a lot because I drive for work so much. But I kind of got a thought from the podcast and kind of started tooling around with it myself and kind of came up with my own little definition of what, or refinement of what they're kind of talking about. The quote is, "Many would rather cling to a problem than confront the discomfort of a solution." So so often we have these problems and people kind of find their identity in their problems versus really trying to solve the problem and find a useful solution.
Yeah. And I think to expand on even the concept that we were talking about, the solution being a way to come through it and still be a functional, maybe hopefully a more functional person on the other side of it, right? So
Yeah.
the core idea that we're dealing with today is the concept of endurance versus resilience. So again, these are words that you hear a lot of times, especially if you're in any kind of culture where there's a motivational aspect to it. You'll hear people talking about pushing through or those kind of things, but there's a really interesting distinction between these two words, and that's kind of where I want to start by unpacking. So let's start like we always do. We're going to break this down into little chunks, and let's start with endurance. When you guys hear the word endurance, what immediately comes to your brain?
For me, I think of like an endurance athlete, because I raced mountain bikes for a long time, for 12 years before I started doing jiu-jitsu, and it was all endurance based, right? Most of it was cross country racing or super D or enduro, and so it was just going out for long periods of time at high rates of speed against other people, right? And you kind of get this lung strength, heart strength, endurance mentality.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it a little bit before. Then people are sort of getting to know this side of your character through the show. Was this something that was baked in, or did the mountain bike racing really help you to develop that sort of endurance mindset?
Yeah, I developed it in mountain biking, right? Because before that, I did team sports, right? Football, baseball, stuff like that, but never really a solo sport. And then solo sport really kind of boils down to like you rise and fall on your own volition. Like how much work you put in is how well you do or how well you don't do. And so you kind of realize you're like, well, if I want to be competitive in these kind of things, like I got to go out and put lots and lots and lots of work in and be okay with that. And if I want to be successful and then you start getting results that kind of reinforce that mentality of, oh, if I become a workhorse and make an output machine, then it works. And then, yeah, you start creating that kind of perspective and their own identity from that style of exercise.
Interesting. Chris, any different perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have that. Like, my brain first goes to the endurance athlete, and then the second thing that I go is like, yeah, but like, how do they keep going? Because like I've tried riding bikes for a long time, and my wife was a Division 1 cross country runner, and I've tried to do like runs with her, and I'm like, I want to quit 5 minutes in. Like like, how do you like? That's my first question is like, how did you get to a point where you were like, no, I'm still 600 meters away from the top of this hill, so I guess I still pedal. Like,
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think that I think my mind goes to the same kind of place where you guys went, which is, that sort of endurance athlete. And in thinking about what that means, to be an endurance athlete versus just an athlete, to Jordan's point, team sport or whatever. Um, but endurance to me has a really specific quality to it. And that is you're gonna push through, right? Regardless of what gets thrown at you. That's the
Mm-hmm.
mentality, right? It's that really digging your feet in and so you're gonna survive, right? But the survival is not gonna be, maybe it's not gonna be pretty, right? Like you're like to like what did you say, Jordan? I'm not gonna die like a pretty corpse, right? I'm gonna,
Yeah.
gonna be like some
Yeah.
gnarled grizzly,
Be all
like pack
busted.
my body in a
Yeah.
crate or something. Um uh there's a gritting your teeth and pushing through and sort of stealing your mind. It's it to me there's always like a forceful aspect to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you're at some point you have to tell yourself it doesn't matter how you feel right now, you're going to keep doing this. And I think that the quality of it that differs from where we're going to go is that when I think of endurance, I think of it as having a gas tank, right? Like at some point, you just can't endure anymore. At some point you will run out of energy, or you will
Mm-hmm.
run out of resources, or you will run out of time, or whatever that you're going to run out that sort of meter that measures your ability to endure. So on the I'm not going to say flip side because I think there's a lot of crossover between these two, but on the other end of this spectrum, what do you think of when you hear the word resilience?
Like the ability to like absorb, like, I don't know, like maybe like absorb problems or deal with problems versus endurance is like maybe more of an act, more of like resilience seems more of like a responsive or a response to something, whereas endurance seems more like a proactive reaction to it or a proactive decision, like overt versus covert kind of a thing.
Yeah. I kind of get something similar
Yeah.
to that, like in the sense of like, resilience is built on feedback loops in a way. Because if endurance is asking like, okay, how long can I do this activity or how long can I survive in this state?
Yeah.
Resilience is more about like what's changing? How do I change too? Right? Like I
Yeah.
get injured at jujitsu and I would need to keep training jujitsu, so how do I evolve so I can keep doing like and then you show up the next day injured doing whatever it is that you can do and someone's like, wow, that looks that's pretty resilient. Like he's still here.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so then tell me if you think this definition is fair, just as sort of a foundation for us to go forward. I think of endurance as sort of me steeling myself against, what's coming, like bracing, and then how long can I stand here and just fight off what's coming, right? I think of resilience as more of I'm dropping the shield and I'm figuring out ways to absorb and grow in that storm, in that opposition or whatever the challenge is. It carries with it more of a bending without breaking, uh, mentality, rather than I'm not going to even let it get through. I'm not going to let it affect me. I'm going to absorb it and try to be better or stronger on the other side of that. Um, okay.
Yeah.
Does that seem fair?
Yeah.
So this is the question that as we were thinking through, what we're going to talk about this, I definitely started processing through some examples in my life of these are places where I've had an endurance mindset and these are places where I've had a resilience mindset. And I was actually kind of shocked a little bit to find that most of my default has always been endurance, right? Just like from the beginning. Um, and I think that to me, it's because resilience carries with it a At least an idea of vulnerability, where endurance doesn't feel as vulnerable, it feels more stubborn. Like,
Mm.
I'm not moving, I'm not bending. Your will not be imposed. It will not even affect what happens to me. I'm an oak. I am a wall. Like, I'm gonna make it through this. Whoever I'm proving it to, you or me or or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna move. Versus, you know, okay, I'm going to accept that there's some pain here. I'm going to accept that this is going to be hard, for the benefit of who I am or the situation overall.
Hmm.
Does that seem fair? Does that seem right?
Yeah.
How have you thought of it? Like, so I guess maybe let's start there. If you had to say that, in generalities overall, is your mentality typically more one of endurance or resilience when you're faced with some sort of adversity or challenge?
Yeah. I'd say endurance for sure for me.
Yeah.
Just
Interesting.
yeah. Like I know that I can overcome things if I just put my head down and just keep driving versus I don't know. I before we got on the thing, like talking about like the Ernest Shackleton kind of perspective on things. Like his family motto was by endurance we conquer. And I really when I read that I really loved it and kind of really internalized it. It's just like whatever I want to achieve, if I can just have endurance for it, like it'll come. And I don't know, and also too, like I was thinking about like when you're talking about the endurance athlete stuff, like I know that like the Navy SEALs are so big into that, right? Like most people quit at 40%. Like, and once you start thinking about those numbers, you're like, man, if I can just go a little bit extra, like if I can push myself a little bit further than most people, like I can achieve so much more because most people quit. Like, and they just don't know where that
Interesting.
the bottom of that barrel is kind of thing. And that's all the Goggins challenges, and this is the jujitsu challenges and the runs and everything else. You're like, how deep can this go? How much can I endure of this? And even like what we are talking about last week, right? Like the Shark Tank thing, like that's an exercise in endurance because you get done with that and you're like, oh, I could probably do another round, like another 30 seconds, right? And then you look at rounds after that and you're like, this is nothing. Like I'm not
Right.
getting wailed on by 30 people today. Like I can definitely roll with this one person for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like that takes the place of the rolling portion of the class. Like
No, exactly.
we still had to have
Yeah,
rolls
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
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 But yeah, it's just I
that.
don't know. It's all measuring, right? Even my kids, we talk about that a lot. Like doing hard things and using it as a metric to measure against other things. Like, is this harder or easier than that crazy bike ride we did, or that whatever you did? Like, how do you measure that against this? And then if you could achieve that, you can definitely achieve this.
That's interesting. I want to unpack a little. I don't want to forget that you said that, but I do want to hear what Chris's perspective is too.
Yeah.
I actually want to lean in a bit, like, because as I'm listening to you talk about it, it's hard for me to separate resilience and endurance into separate qualities the way that you're describing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
that was where I was going with it too, because
yeah.
I was thinking, so endurance, though, that actually causes growth or allows growth, technically resilience,
Yeah.
right? Like I think that that characteristic of endurance is one of, I just need to get through this. I just need to weather whatever
Hmm.
happens. It's not a like like if you go to do something that you already know you can do, right? Like, but it's going to suck. And then you go do it anyway. And then the whole time, maybe every step you take, you go, I knew this was going to suck. I knew this was
Yeah.
going to suck. Whatever. I knew this was, right? But I'm going to keep pushing through. I'm going to keep, and then you make it. And you do that. That's a I think that's part of what for me has got brought out when I was thinking about endurance was the how closely your mindset is attached to that, right? Because your mindset's going to make or break your ability to
Hmm.
execute.
It like like listening to you talk about it, Jordan, like triggered a thought in a way. And I'm gonna use a jujitsu metaphor, but I'll try to like make it as generic as possible for our non-jujitsu audience members. But like the thing that popped into my mind was, we're working on close guard on the Saturday classes. We do this specific drill where we just run the line and we have people that are trying to get out of the close guard and pass. And if you are the one who is using your close guard, you have to sweep or submit, right? So to me, endurance would be I've got, Jordan in my close guard and he's stacking hard. He's not trying to pass necessarily. He's trying to make my life uncomfortable. Or he's, doing that move where you dig the elbows into the thighs to cause pain.
Hmm.
To my mind, endurance is how long can I survive this? Nothing is happening. There's no adaptation. There's no movement. I'm just in extreme discomfort. How long can I survive it? But like, I think the resilience is okay, great. You're in that moment of discomfort and you know you can survive. But the resilience then goes, well, how do I take what he's doing and move with it? Like if he's stacking me and I adjust my angle, I'm still going to be under pressure. So I need the endurance to survive it. But the resilience is how I think through moving under that pressure to maybe secure an arm and sweep him over. And so it's more like, okay, is what Jordan was describing in his example of it, is it like endurance is like the framing of the house, right? It's the structure, but resilience is the rest of the furniture and moving things around in the house and designing it. Like it builds upon the other.
Yeah. Uh, and I was thinking of it, the way you laid it out is sort of, I think, a perfect actual visualization of the way that you evolve in the sport of jujitsu or in anything that you end up doing.
Anything. Yeah.
um you start out as a white belt just enduring, right? You're like,
Hmm.
this is straight hellish survival, right? And then, but as you get up through it, everybody keeps telling you, you got to breathe, don't be so spasmy, don't be, all these things, and you're like, okay, okay, and then you get
Yeah.
in there and you're like, okay, I'm gonna breathe the whole time, and then you
Yeah.
stop like instantly. But as you get to these higher belt levels and as you start becoming more mature in your game and your ability to process, it truly does become easier to breathe and easier to
Mhm.
keep moving and easier, because you're actually using your resources the correct way, and um it's way more about bending than it is about just maintaining a position, right? So I think that it's a great, I mean, as always, jujitsu provides amazing analogies. You should definitely check out a class if you're not already doing that. Uh, but so is there though? So we're talking a little bit, and I think that we're talking about the benefits, right, of just the awareness of the difference between the two mentalities. Um, if we think of it that way, right, then ultimately, in order to grow, we have to move at some point from some level of endurance to some level of resilience,
Mhm.
I
right?
absolutely think so.
We
Yeah.
have to, right?
Yeah.
um what do you think the dangers are of not making that adjustment, or not making that, or are there dangers? Not to say that one is wrong, per se, or the other, but what do you think about that?
I think it's so. If I'm getting you right, Chris, like you're seeing endurance as a foundation, and then resilience is kind of what you build upon it, right?
Uh-huh.
So the risk is then only doing foundational work and never really building and taking risks and developing things in your life that come from risk, right? And the
Yeah,
resilience is what's required to deal with that risk.
Interesting.
I think that's exactly right. And
Yeah.
I think so let's talk about why that is. Um what is how can endurance become a trap then that keeps you from evolving or
Yeah.
from
It's just
moving
risk
into it?
avoidant, right? You start living life risk
You
avoidant.
become stubborn.
Yeah.
Like every
Yeah.
challenge in front of you is one to withstand, not one to adapt to.
So I was thinking about this one a lot. Um, I told a story I think a couple episodes ago about recently quitting a job and going to another one. But before I did that, I spent several years just absolutely miserable, in my head. Um, and I think that it could apply to so many things, right? Like think about anybody out there listening to think about your current situation. Are you in a job that you're just miserable in? Are you in a relationship that you're miserable in? Are you in, circumstances that actually are more controllable than you think, but you've just gotten to this place where, you're just numb, to all of the things that are happening. Um, have you ever stayed in a toxic relationship? Have you ever stayed in a toxic job? Have you ever, just kept toxic elements around you? Have you ever stayed in a toxic diet? Have you, like, just sometimes the idea of endurance, and I think to me, the danger besides before we get to not growing, uh, the danger is developing those things into habits, that
Yeah.
then you just end up on autopilot and eventually, someone goes, dude, why are you doing that? And it's like, it's cool. I can handle it, like, and I think that there's a massive difference between things that you're capable of enduring and things that
Yes.
actually improve your life.
Yes. 100%. 100%.
you know,
I think like what you're hitting on is this notion of like energy. I mean, endurance is an energy-based system, and you only get so much energy, right? So if your whole posture is how do I endure a difficulty, you're gonna run out of that energy and you're gonna burn out and it's gonna be painful. So just as much as it's a risk that you're never gonna grow, you're never gonna adapt if you don't do the resilience layer. On the other hand, if you're only focused on enduring, you're gonna burn out. You become really stiff, like Jordan was talking about. You're not going to see different perspectives, and you're going to look like, well, I'm just suffering through this, so I'm doing the right thing. And it's like, again, if you're just suffering for the sake of suffering, all you're doing is burning energy. So what? What next? What do you do?
yeah. I mean, what do you do? Right? Like eventually, to your point, that gas tank runs out. I heard somebody put it, uh, if you're reacting, you're using energy. And if you're using energy, you're losing.
Hmm.
Right? Which I thought was really interesting. I thought that was a really interesting concept.
Yeah, I like that.
What then does resilience look like? Because I'm thinking so specifically, and Jordan, I relate to you a lot. When you talk about endurance, actually, it was funny. Michelle and I were talking about you because uh, we kind of laugh every once in a while whenever you do something crazy, and I'm just like, how am I friends with this guy? Like, but but I think that this conversation actually opened my eyes a little bit to, um, not to the ways that we're different because those are funny and like we laugh about it and whatever. But I always think, like, oh, I don't like to suffer and I don't, but that's horseshit. Like it's just something I say. Because if I didn't enjoy it on some level, then I really am just enduring through life, right? And I hope that at this point I'm not just enduring through life. I hope that I've learned enough from the toxic relationships and the toxic jobs and the all those things. I hope I've learned to be a little bit more resilient. But I think that this area of crossover is where I've arrived as that's the area where we relate to each other, right?
Mhm.
Is that place in the middle, because both of them, like I said, people use these words interchangeably, right? And it's because they have similar aspects. There are
Right,
things
they
about them.
overlap.
They do, for sure they do. um and I think that our where we relate to each other is in that overlap. we don't relate to each other in the extremes,
Mm-hmm.
right? We just take different paths, like
Mm-hmm.
and I don't, and it could be an excuse. I'm not going to make excuses for myself. Jordan, you quoted Goggins, that, or the SEALs, that most people quit at 40%. um and I don't necessarily view it like I'm quitting or I can't do that. I oftentimes think I no longer see the value in that suffering. Like, I don't see what I'm gleaning from it
You shift into
anymore.
adaptation faster.
Right. Other than just proving to myself that I can, which at this point, like I said, I understand the value in the testing and all that stuff. I think that's more of a periodical thing. I don't feel like I have to do that every single day. I remember yesterday that I could do it. Maybe tomorrow I'll test it again just to make sure, dip my toe in the water, whatever. Whereas you wake up like, okay, what happened yesterday? Let's, like, how can we
Yeah.
smash that into,
Yeah.
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, it's so funny. But what do the characteristics, if truly, like, bracing and pushing through and all those things, if those are the characteristics of endurance, then what are the characteristics of resilience? How would you identify them?
I think resilience is much more of a not a mature perspective, but maybe a perspective that comes from experiencing long term endurance, right? Like realizing what you can and can't manage, and then going, okay, now that I know I can handle this. Like, how can I use this? How can I learn from this? How can I either
Yeah.
change or not change? 'Cause I was thinking about it, like, I wonder if the opposite of endurance is, or of resilience is apathy.
Ooh. Yeah. 100%. I think that's
Mhm.
really clever. Yeah.
Like
I
you, like
mean,
relationally, or like you get to a certain point, like you can, if you have a bad
You
relationship,
just
you're
numb
like,
out.
yeah,
well, is that so?
That's an endurance
That's
risk.
interesting. That's interesting that you said that, right? Zone out, right? Or like, or numb ourselves to our situation. And then we do one of two things, right? We either stay and just endure it because we
Mhm.
can, or we don't stay and we figure out how to become a healthier person, hopefully. Like, uh no, I think that's a really astute observation. Because I think sometimes, like, so it's an interesting situation, probably most people maybe most men have to deal with. But when I was a kid, I never saw any of the men in my life cry. Right? Like, they just didn't cry. It wasn't they didn't cry when they hurt themselves. They didn't cry when they were sad. Like, they just didn't. It was a stoic, like, I will, all the emotions are contained within, and I will process them in my own way, in my own time. It's not going to be your concern. It's not going to be
Mhm.
your effort. Um, as an older man, as I get older, oh God, as I get older, though, uh, I find that that is not the case for me. Like,
Mhm.
throw up a good video of a vet coming home early and surprising their kid in their classroom or something, and I'm like, okay, fuck this. I can't, my day's over.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
stop talking to
Yeah.
me. I can't handle this.
Yeah.
And even just, like, if I watch a movie where, um, like, somebody selflessly sacrifices themselves, or a dad goes out of it for their kid, or so, just like, something that I can relate to, that's, like, really personal, how much I love my boys, and then I think, about how that situation relates. I never had that when I was younger.
Mhm.
It was much more about just keeping the emotions contained, let the women be emotional, and my job was to be strong and to be able to take anything, and to,
Hmm.
it's an incredible amount of pressure to put on any human being, uh, to assume that you have to be that solid, impenetrable wall all the
Mhm.
time. Um, so to me, it's interesting that I loved the way that you both talked about it. To me, the resilient part of it is being able to go, you know what? Not only am I going to let my emotions move me naturally, I'm not going to do it with shame. You know, like, uh, if I can't achieve something, I'm not going to be ashamed to say I need help.
Right.
You know, or I can't do this by myself, letting go of things that not only don't fit, but that are actually damaging you to keep holding in your hands. And being able to go, part of growth means cutting this part out that doesn't
Yeah.
serve anymore. That's tearing it down. And not only that, but not feeling guilty about making that choice.
Hmm.
You know, I was thinking about, I use analogies with trees a lot because I think trees are just an amazing, part of nature. But trees that grow with adversity, so like a lot of wind, a lot of natural things moving around, they become big and strong because they develop super deep roots. Every time
Mhm.
a breeze blows by a tree, it sends another root down to make sure that it doesn't get blown over. So if you ever see a tree that's growing on like the side of a hill or something that never had any adversity, it's usually
Mhm.
thinner and it usually comes down faster, right? Um, the name of the podcast is Sweeter After Difficulty. Very intentional reason.
Mhm.
I believe fully that you have to have that wind blowing so that you sink your roots deeper in. I think you cannot be a complete human without enduring some sort of suffering, because I think suffering is a natural part of the human condition, right? And so to pretend that it isn't denies your humanity, which prevents you from growing as a human. That's just my
Okay.
opinion.
Okay.
Um, what do you think about that definition of resilience?
I think you're building it with more depth, right? Like this idea of shooting down more roots is all about adaptation. It's easy to think about it instead as like a physical structure. Oh, this is how we can more better withstand something. And it's like, well, yeah, if you're trying to withstand something with more efficiency so that you can be there longer, like that's what resilience is. You are producing a change. And when you were kind of talking about your own experiences with it, I think what you're describing resilience as mostly is presence, the state of mind of being present and recognizing what it is that you're enduring. And so then it's if it's presence, if that's what it is, how do you build resilience? The question is just what feedback do you see around you? You're in the moment, you've recognized that you're going through something, that you're enduring something. How can I adjust this slightly? I don't need to break the machine. I don't need to wholesale change everything, but like, what's one thing that I can do to change this circumstance? Okay, I'm going to fire a new route down
Mhm.
so I don't fall over.
Yeah. Have either of you heard of or are you aware of enneagrams?
Think
No.
so? Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So there are all kinds of personality tests that you can take, like the
Oh yeah,
DISC
yeah,
test
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
things like that, right? Well, the DISC test kind of
Yeah.
separates you into four four basic categories. A lot of corporate
Yeah.
training uses it because it truly is like a good sort of guideline on how to talk to other personalities
Yeah.
and be understanding and open. The Enneagram is a more in-depth personality assessment that basically it breaks down how you developed that personality into your current
Hmm.
personality. So they all have something different. They have tons of different qualities. And it's actually interesting. There's a guy, there's a couple of people now, but there's a guy who specifically wrote songs to describe each one of the different enneagrams. So you can listen to,
Uh,
like, if you once you find out what your enneagram is, you can go listen to a song. I'm gonna warn you right now, if you have never done this, uh, I swaggered into this Enneagram test and I was like, okay, here we go. A friend of mine brought it up at work and was like, and sent me a link and I did it. And it turns out that I'm what's called an Enneagram 8. So my number is 8. And an 8 basically is someone who as a very young person, in my case, I'm going to say 3 or 4. I was around a damaged person, in
Mm.
this case, a parent of mine, I was being raised by a single parent, and it was, not great times, and they were partying a lot, and I, for whatever reason, right? I don't know what it is that makes people go a certain way or another, but I took up the responsibility as that child of being the protector in the household. So
Mm.
I picked up this armor and I put it on. And I basically decided as a kid, I'm not going to let anybody affect me emotionally, not good or bad, right? You're not going to be able to build me up. You're not going to be able to tear me down. I will tell you what you're allowed to be to me. And I will tell you how I'm going to grow and how I'm going to move and how I'm going to operate.
Hmm.
Right. And because of that, I lived my whole life with really effective armor around me that kept everyone nice and far away. Even my family, like the protection, and the feeling safe, the feeling of you can't get through my armor kept me going through life. And then this stupid Enneagram test came, right? And I discovered this about myself. And then I listened to this song. And when I say that I ugly cried, like for the first time as an adult, you
Yeah.
know, um, like cathartic, gut wrenching, like they're like really ripping your soul off. But actually, it was starting to figure out how to rip these pieces of armor off, right? Starting to understand that if I was going to grow and reach my full potential as a human, being strong wasn't going to be enough. Right? Because eventually I was going to be a frail old man dead inside an impenetrable set of armor, and nobody would have ever got to me through that, for my whole life. And I don't think I think that makes my life kind of useless, in one way or another. Maybe not useless isn't the right word, but it, it definitely would not be one of being fulfilled. And it didn't allow me at all to be available for the majority of people, right? It was very specific, very aimed at something specific, at protection, and and those, being a sentinel, standing firm, being that wall not just for myself but in front of other people, you
Yeah.
know like I would see people making bad decisions for themselves and it would keep me up at night. Like I would emotionally not be able to deal with somebody else's bad choices, like that's,
Mm.
it's not healthy, at all. But it was the state of things. So when I got through that, I listened to that song, and again, like I said, find a happy place and go listen to it because it's terrible. But I think you should. I think you should learn as much about yourself as you can. So that, like I said, so you can be as effective and useful to as many people as possible. But that sort of mentality, that lifestyle was rooted in endurance.
Hmm.
I made that choice as a kid, and you don't know everything. I mean, I now, the older you get, right, the more you realize you know nothing. But when I was a kid, I thought I knew more. I was like, okay, well, best case scenario, um, I don't get hurt here. Uh, if you think about your situation in your life, like I'm just thinking about, like, you, Jordan, you saying, talking about, pushing hard enough, long enough that eventually you get to, elevate to the next level. But I also hear Chris talking about, and even in past episodes, the non-confrontational aspect of things, and, not so much like, but even that's sort of a resilience as a survival
100%. It's all
methodology,
based on
right?
it. It's based on appeasement because if you're
Yeah.
appeased, then there's no conflict.
Yeah. Can you expand a little bit more, like on your thoughts on that sort of
Yeah.
aspect of it? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think for me, growing up, like conflict, um, had a lot of emotional depth to it, and it wasn't viewed as this like competitive domain. Like, in other words, entering into a conflict when I was younger wasn't about who would be the victor and who would be the loser. It was more so about what's the fastest path to resolution. And I learned over time to form habits where the resolution of the conflict was less important than the conflict being over. Meaning, I didn't need to be right or wrong. I just didn't want to have to deal with the conflict because that was the hard part. And so this non-confrontational approach all began and feeded with, people pleasing, trying to understand what the other person was trying to say, and instead of disagree with them for the purpose of being right or for the purpose of changing their course or testing their assumptions, I would try to unpack what it was that they actually wanted and then agree with them so that conflict would never arise. And so it was like this, prejudgment to try to get out in front of it and get away from it. And I think that was a similar form of armor where it's like more about deflecting than it is about withstanding. But it comes from, I think, that similar place of I don't want to have to deal with this. Like, so I'm going to adapt. I'm going to make a change. And instead of trying to fight it, by locking horns, I'm just going to kind of like, shoo it away to the side.
So you're in kind of a similar situation as me and Jordan too, actually. So the transition from sort of that mentality to getting involved in jujitsu and then having your world turned upside down, and now all of a sudden you have different ideas about all of
Yeah.
these things. How did that affect your relationship with your wife?
Oh man. It's funny. My wife, after that first day of jujitsu, where I like hurt my rib and I got my butt kicked incessantly, and I came back and I was just describing to her this feeling of utter helplessness. Um, she was really encouraged. She's like, "Well, you have to go back, right?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, like this is the thing I'm doing. Like I have to go back." And so she was a big partner in my journey to keep putting me in environments where my self-worth would be something that was important and built. Because if I came from this area of non-confrontation, what you're doing is subduing the sense of self. You're saying, I'm no longer as important in this situation where a confrontation could exist, so I will diminish myself so that the confrontation never happens. And you get into jujitsu, over time, it doesn't become about a physical sport. You will lose far more than you ever win. And then when you get up to the upper levels where Randy and Jordan are, you win far more than you lose, but that doesn't account for the multi-year history of losses that it took to get to that point. That's just the brown and black belts I view as like the tip of the iceberg. So my journey along this path is like, hey, you're going to confront people over and over and over, and you're going to lose, and you're going to have disagreements about the best way to approach things and the best way to grow, but that doesn't mean that you need to diminish yourself in that process. Like your value is important. Your perspectives help them grow. Your ability to have an identity that is built on confidence, that is value additive to the system. And confrontation isn't something that you should avoid, although I still have that habit in all these other domains, right? But like my wife is continually pushing me to be like, I see that you need this and that you deserve this and that this is beneficial for you, building that self-confidence and that identity to say, like, my presence is adding to circumstance. And when there's confrontation, that addition is still important, right? That's not like a devaluing of the self in a way.
Hmm.
Yeah. So good. What do you think about that, Jordan? How's it affected your home life,
Yeah.
transitioning from something like mountain biking to something like jujitsu?
Um, it's interesting. Like, so I know for me, jujitsu really like calmed me down, right? Really kind of like turned down that internal knob from a seven to a two, right? And I know that it definitely has affected my parenting in the fact that I'm like, things just don't bother me that the kids will do. Like they'll do something crazy. It's like, hey, knock that off. Don't do that. Like versus like getting really mad or really angry or yelling.
Yeah.
It's just like, just don't do that. Like, and it's like kind of teaching those lessons to your kids. You're like, if somebody calls out to you, don't assume that they're ignoring you. Or you call to somebody and they don't turn around to see you. Like, don't assume that they're ignoring you. Assume they didn't hear you, right? Or don't assume that the person who cut you off on the freeway is intentionally trying to cut you off. You don't exist to them. And so it's like trying to teach them this like internal tuning. And both my kids train, and both of them kind of have that little bit. And it's still fun for them, and they still don't really apply the lessons right to the outside world. But it's just, but I really see a lot in my parenting, because so I don't know, like Melissa's never really been like super involved in my jujitsu journey, right? It's always been kind of my thing, and then I come home and then I'm home, right? Like she's come to watch a couple classes and she's like, I don't get it. Like it doesn't make sense to me.
That's what mom says too.
Awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
there's worse things, because Michelle comes and then she goes, listen, if you lose, you're walking home. I remember when I was like, when I was getting to the towards blue belt from the white belt place, and I was just getting to the place where I wasn't just completely wrecked after every single class, but it was still incredibly painful, right? And I'd be sitting at home, and she'd go, "Are you gonna go to jujitsu tonight, or are you gonna be a bitch?"
Yeah. I
Totally tracks.
I remember a time Michelle came and Jimmy grabbed you and he's like, Michelle, remember Randy for how he was, and then and then just wipe the
I
floor
was
with
just
you for
like,
5 minutes, and Michelle was just howling, laughing like maniacal.
Jimmy loves to do this thing. He will get me in this horrible spot, and then he'll look up at Michelle and he'll go, "Get your camera ready. Your husband's about to scream tap."
Perfect.
dude, like when you were doing the Shark Tank a few weeks ago, and you had like your ribs like not located where it should be, and I look over at Michelle and I'm like, I think he's hurt, and then she doesn't even make eye contact with me, and she goes, he's fine. Like, I can see his rib. It's not where it should be.
Yeah, man,
Uh,
suck it up.
and I have to give her absolute credit. Um, it's a part of my personality that I know the best way to do everything, and I know what's best for me, and I know this.
Yeah.
And she is someone who I love and respect enough that she can go, whatever you're thinking about yourself right now is not true. So whether it's, you're too full of yourself, or you're not, or you're beating yourself up, whatever that is, it's too extreme one way or the other. And she really pulls me back to the middle, keeps me humble, but also lifts me up when she needs to.
10-pound hammer of reality.
But it's something like sometimes she'll say something super hard to me like that, and we'll just sit there quiet, for a little while, and then I'll just say, thank you.
Nice.
Like I appreciate that, because like honestly, I am someone who wants all of the information, no matter how painful it's going to be, and I want the truth no matter what. Right? Like I don't want to deal with bullshit. I want to, and I'm careful not to ask her questions where I already have an answer I want. Because I'm probably not going to get it. Right? She's super supportive and super encouraging, and probably thinks more highly of me than she should, but she is absolutely willing to lay the smackdown when, she knows that I know it's appropriate, and I'm just trying to get away with
That's
something,
awesome.
or
That's so
whatever.
cool.
Yeah, no, it's the best. It's the best. And she was like, "You never talk about me on the podcast." So there you go, babe. I'm talking
Yeah.
about you on the podcast.
Michelle is
Uh,
the accelerant for your resilience.
I don't talk about her as much because everyone that meets Michelle instantly is like, "Oh, Michelle's better than you. We're gonna go to Michelle." And I'm like, "Thanks."
Yeah.
She's not allowed to do jujitsu. I don't need more people liking her than me in there.
Right. Give us about 15 more episodes and she'll be the host.
Yeah.
This is her show soon. That's amazing. Um, yeah. So under those kind of circumstances too, I think what that has done for me is it's made me realize that a lot of the hills that I choose to die on, or or at least to to pick up my sword and fight on, they're way more like situationally important than they are big picture important, right? Do you think that endurance and resilience both have their place situationally? Or, even after you get to the point where, like Jordan, you described it as, maturing, or, or maybe just evolving into that next, phase of whatever it is. But do you think even after you've gotten past that place that they both still have an important role to play?
Yeah, I think you can always go back to endurance and always kind of like maybe tap into that mentality or that perspective when it comes to like new situations or new things to overcome, right? Traumatic events or like a plane crash, right? You need to kind of endure the moment to get through it to get to the next part, kind of a thing, or kids being sick or whatever, car crash, right? I think it's a cyclical thing where you get to a good point in resilience, and you probably find yourself back in endurance to handle something in the moment, and then go back to resilience and kind of float back and forth almost.
Do you feel like that's a slip in your progress, or do you just think it's just a natural part of the
I
condition?
don't, no, I don't think so because I don't know. I see it maybe like if you can compare it to, I know we try to not do jujitsu all the time, but like getting to your black belt and going, okay, well, now I need to go back. I want to focus on my fundamentals again, and maybe go in fact focusing on the little weak parts in my endurance game that in life that I might need to figure out things here and there, and then go back to the resilience part of it. And I don't know. I think you can always be looking for things to improve in both resilience, probably, and endurance. Because I think as you don't use your endurance, maybe like a muscle, it gets weaker too, right? And maybe your resilience gets stronger and your endurance gets weaker. It's kind of like a kind of floating back and forth, trying to make sure that both of those are. And then they're probably two sides of the same coin, right? And one can't be more dominant than the other. They probably should be pretty equal when it comes to their strengths, maybe not their application though.
Do you think that has to naturally that you naturally have to adjust the levels of, like maybe when you still have the option, choosing to make them more balanced is appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point you get to the place where endurance isn't as realistic of a prospect anymore,
Yeah.
right? Like no matter how hard I want to fight, my gas tank is only going to give me this much, and
Mm-hmm.
that's going to keep diminishing the older you get,
Mm-hmm.
until ultimately you completely run out. Um, so do you believe that's a natural progression, or do you think that there's a way to maintain that balance till the end of your life?
I think it's a how bad do you want it kind of a thing. Because as people get older, men especially get older, you start things get harder to do. Right, it's harder to stay in shape. It's harder to eat right. To kind of have that perspective of like, oh, I was going to eat this cheesecake today because I'm I'm old and what? Who cares? Like, I don't know. Like,
Right.
in the morning class, we have guys in their mid 60s, like still training jujitsu, like and you see these guys, and you're like, they're still fit, they're still there, they're still grinding away and doing their thing, and they pick and choose their rounds because they don't want to get snapped in half by somebody. But I don't know. I think it still requires some endurance to show back up and to do that, to put that work in. And I don't know. Maybe it's an aging thing. Like the older you get, the less endurance you have. But I don't know. I think a lot of my personality has been kind of based upon being able to endure and have endurance and do that. And I'd be interesting maybe 30 years from now to see what happens personality wise for me.
Yeah, I'm super fascinated to see Jordan in 30 years, what that looks like.
So squatting 315 and
Yeah.
running 4 miles a day.
Yeah.
He's coming to visit me in the home.
Yeah. Get
Yeah,
up, Raven.
exactly. Exactly.
uh, so as we're coming up on time here, um, any anything we didn't cover, any other observations that, about either endurance or resilience that struck you while we were having this convo?
I think for me, like closing off kind of what Jordan was saying, like that's an approach that really works for him, and that's how he can manage the systems. For me, I think it's less of like a binary. It's not like I I don't have the ability to sit there and go like, okay, do I need to be resilient right now or do I need to be enduring? You know? And it's so if it's harder for me to recognize it, like my thing is that they kind of are both always on. And for me, it's more about like what is burning me out? Like how do I ask questions in moments of self-reflection about the energy? Because if I'm getting burned out, like, okay, what's the source? Like my endurance is running low. And then the next question has to be like, okay, so does something need to change? And that's like just those two things, I think, alone are how the systems work together in the micro and the macro. But yeah, I don't have that like skill set to be like, okay, we're enduring and we're staying in the moment. That's the value. And now I'm being resilient and that's the moment and that's the value. For me, it's like, what is burning the candle at both ends? Like, is that the way it should be? How can I make a subtle shift so that it's not burning at both ends, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. So I think probably sometimes for me it feels like I start out in endurance mode and then like naturally it just the switch flips, you know, into that resilience mode where you're like, okay, yeah, the gas tank's empty and I've got 4 minutes left in this round. You know? uh,
Frames.
it's time to get a little flexible here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, man, I know I say it every episode, but I love these conversations. I love the perspective that you guys bring. Definitely a fascinating topic. I think probably one that will end up being a theme that we revisit, you know, occasionally, and just as it applies to other things. But as always, you know, guys, I just really appreciate and value your sides of things, and for bringing, I'm sure our audience does too. For everybody out there who's listening, thank you so much for sticking with us along this journey. We are super excited to have you here. Make sure that you're following us. We've got the full catalog on Spotify and Rumble. You can go check it out. If you give it a like, you make some comments, give it a subscription, send it out to your friends. That really helps us with our algorithm and getting these messages out there. We find a lot of value in these conversations, so hopefully you do too. But in the meantime, we just want to, as always, express gratitude. Thank you for being here. And to Jordan and Chris, always thank you for being here. We appreciate you guys. And
Yeah.
we will see you next week for another episode. Thanks, everyone.
Here's
Yeah.
Shea.